Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm so happy to have Dr. Khaled Abou El Fadl as our guest speaker today for our parenting seminar. I'm going to keep my introduction brief because I can go on and on about his accomplishments. As many of you know, Dr. Khaled Abou El Fadl is a distinguished law professor at UCLA. He has served on multiple human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and currently still serves on Middle East Watch. He is a brilliant author who has written multiple books with a focus on authority, democracy, human rights, and beauty in Islam and Islamic law. He is also the founder of Usuli Institute, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to research and education and a humanistic approach to Islam. He's also someone that I personally admire and has helped me. I credit Dr. Khaled for what I call my re-education on Islam. He has empowered me to use my intellect in a conscientious manner and has deepened my understanding of my moral obligations as a Muslim. Words can't express how much gratitude we feel to Dr. Khaled for taking time out of his very busy schedule today to be with us. I'm going to just give everyone an idea of the format of today. I know it's a Q&A, but we have curated a list of questions beforehand for the sake of time. We are hoping to get through these questions, all of these questions, these amazing questions. We are planning to end in an hour, but for those of you who want to stick around, Dr. Khaled has generously offered to stay an extra hour in which we can possibly take audience questions. And without further ado, I welcome you, Dr. Khaled. Welcome to New Horizon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Very nice to be with you.
So do you want to give us a brief introduction or do you want to go straight into the questions?
No, let's go into the questions.
Okay. So we'll start with a general question just to kick things off. The first question is, what are the most important teachings for parents from the Prophet, particularly given our challenges in 2023?
The most important teaching is what the life of the Prophet ﷺ embodied. What he embodied was what we know more about his relationship with his daughters because his sons died rather young, and we also know quite few narratives about his relationship with his grandchildren, Al-Hassan and Hussein. And with his children generally, but even with the children of his community, what he consistently embodied and what he consistently expressed are two basic things, two essential things. One is that he consistently expressed love. And in fact, the narratives about him and Al-Hassan and Hussein, his grandchildren, or the narratives about him and Fatma, for instance, they are so expressive of his love for them. He was never too shy to tell his children, tell these children and many other children actually in the community, because we also have a lot of different narratives about different children in the community, how much he loved them. And he would always joke with them and laugh with them and um, uh, um, e- express his prayers for them out loud to them and in their presence. So that's one. That's all under the first category that I think is he was never uh, inaccessible or never unavailable or too important, um, or as so many adults, a lot of adults are uncomfortable with themselves um, because of so many unresolved conflicts within themselves, and unresolved feelings of shame about themselves. But that's a very big topic. But so all of that is under the first. The other second thing is that you notice from with all his children is that he consistently either expressed it in words or demonstrated it in actions, or it consistently reinforced the idea that your life on earth, that you are here in this world for a mission, and that at the center and core of this mission is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not yourself, it is not your family, it is not your tribe, it is not your clan. Um, but as the Quran says, a mithaq, ma'Allah, that a covenant with Allah. And uh, so while the sort of fascinating dynamic of, on the one hand, he plays and jokes with children as children, reinforcing their childhood, but at the same time giving them a sense of a seriousness about their existence and a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, a cause. So they're not just, and subhanallah, this um, we find this sense of, and this is again, it's just there's a lot to say, but the sense of cause is both with girls and boys, with the female siblings, children, and with the grandchildren, um, uh, especially as um, they grew a bit older. But these are the two main things for if that come to mind. Um, if we are talking broadly about uh, his philosophy of dealing with children. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective, just considering that I think we like as parents, we kind of let kids off the hook because we just keep saying they're just kids, they're just kids, they're just kids. I know this as a parent. When my younger children, I kind of would just let things slide. And now they're in an age where they can take more responsibilities. And I feel like I sometimes wish that I had enforced some things just so that they know that they have a role in this, not only in the universe, but a role in their family, in their home, with their peers. So giving them that sense of responsibility as well. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the second question. This is a good question. The question is, how can we instill love of Islam in children as opposed to fear? And how does one explain the concept of God to younger children?
Yeah, that is a you know the um yes, it is, philosophically, you can uh, have these many discussions with your children about the concept of God, that uh, uh, a what they call the first cause, they that life is too intricate, too methodical. No amount of accident or uh, um, coincidence or evolution will compose a symphony. It's just not possible. I mean, can you imagine uh, that? Yes, coincidence can compose tunes, um, can produce simple linear melodies, perhaps, but an entire symphony, uh, an intricate, complex symphony of movement and balance. Um, and that's what really those who say that there's no God is telling us to believe that somehow a symphony composed itself. And then, it's as if the instruments in the symphony come and say, well, a composer composed us. So who composed the composer? And they don't understand, because they're instruments, and that they only understand their reality. And their reality is comes from a paradigm of music and notes. They can't understand, they can't imagine the world of biology. The created is trapped within the dimensions and realities of their own. They cannot imagine anything beyond. And if you tell these instruments, well, the composer was not composed, but was born out of a biological process, they have no clue what you're talking about. They're instruments. They were never conceived in a biological uh, process. So finding these comparisons that communicate to children that the logic that is often used very simplistically and unintelligently. Oh well, okay, fine. So if God created everything, so who created God? It's erroneous logic. It's a logic that completely ignores um, uh, the fact that human imagination and human conceptions, regardless of how sophisticated, always remains limited by its own range of experiences. When all is said and done, human logic is built upon what human beings have experienced. Uh, Practically nothing in human logic is able to transcend what human beings have collectively experienced. So this is a very, perhaps, uh, um, um, this is just a way of saying to children, uh, listen, um, an encyclopedia doesn't write itself. No coincidence will produce an entire encyclopedia. Um, or same thing with no symphony writes itself. Complex systems that show balance and harmony, and especially these very intricate balances that need a great deal to be maintained and sustained, uh, are not the, uh, never a product of coincidence. So now that's just at the basic level. But I'll tell you, uh, the thing that anchors the belief in God with children is, um, if you think of your own childhood and you think of your own upbringing and you think of, and I'm sure this is something that all children go through. Every child, when they've gone through moments of sadness in their life, they've gone through moments of loneliness in their life, gone through moments of hardship in their life, they were tempted at one point or another to think of Allah, to think of God as a friend, as a companion. Uh, uh, and it is often experiences in life that disabuse them of that temptation. So if they thought, oh, I need God to be my friend, I'm going to keep a diary and talk to God and so on, and then they find they might find a group of friends that laugh at the idea that you're talking to God, or mock the idea that it's not cool, it's not the in thing anymore. So they move on. Um, Allah alam, but in my experience, the balance to that is that the child looks at the parent and sees a living example of what it means for someone to be a believer. A child will go south and north, up and down. They will, travel the universe and back, but they always come back to what their parent embodied, what their parent represented. If they look at their parent and they see a serious living example of a believer. So it's someone who tells a parent that tells the child, believe in God, and the child looks back at the parent and sees that the parent actually, uh, the full meaning, or at least a substantial meaning, if not even a full meaning, but a substantial meaning of what it means to see someone who believes in God, someone who thinks of God frequently, someone who says, um, son, daughter, I, I, because of God, I'm doing this, or because of God, I'm not doing this. Someone who mentions God, who says, oh, we could have done X, but no, it's haram. Uh, without hysterics. Yani, for example, a real story. I know someone who had uh, someone who was hit by another car from the back, and uh, you know it came time to the insurance information and all of that, to fix the car because they were hit from the back, and it, the children in this case witnessed their parent falsely claim a neck injury to get more money from the insurance company. And just because of that, the entire Islam and belief in God was gone. Just because they didn't say anything, it was just something they observed and kept to themselves, but it communicated that all the things that their parents have been telling them about, that they take seriously the idea of Allah, and Allah is ever present, Allah is observing, all is nonsense. When it came time to making an extra buck, their parent was willing to make an extra buck by lying, and so the entire edifice of uh, and my experience in life is that that's very true. That is so true. If the relationship with Allah, if the child always sees that the parent is serious about this relationship, it's a foundation that they come back to. They might drift away for a while. They might even, call themselves an atheist for a bit and get it out of their system. But if the foundation is clean and good, they come back. On the other hand, if they've seen duplicity and dishonesty and inconsistency, uh, they drift away and never come back. Yeah.
I completely agree with this. I like, as an adult, you don't see it when you're younger, but as an adult, I recognize how much my parents modeled Islam to us, and I feel so grateful to that. Like, it's something that I'll always be grateful for. Alhamdulillah. So the next question is, how did the Prophet empower youth to be confident leaders?
I mean, subhanAllah, we see this very clearly in his track record. Something very striking about the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ is that the stakes are very high, and the cost of failure is also quite substantial. But he clearly entrusted young people with very serious missions. I mean, all of us that have studied the Sira, one of the things that we grow up with is that this person was 16 years old when he took part in this battle, or when he was the emir, or the leader, or the commander of the following military unit. Or what people don't talk about as much is that young people who were 18, early 20s were sent on missions to teach Islam to tribes, missions that were required serious commitments. You're going as a guest of a tribe, and you're their Islam teacher effectively, and you're very green, you're very young. But even you notice that although the Prophet ﷺ was a prophet, you don't discern the difference in the way that he spoke to old companions of his, as opposed to youth. In other words, he always spoke the truth, and the truth was indivisible, whether he is speaking to the older or the younger. And that clearly gave young people, so much so that we know, for instance, I mean, one of the very famous precedents is in the Battle of Uhud, when the young people were of, and when we say young, we are talking about very young. I mean, we're talking about people in their teens who had one opinion and the older generation had another. They thought, the younger people were arguing that we should go out and meet the enemy in the battlefield, while the older generation thought we should defend Medina, um, from within Medina and not go meet the enemy out in the battlefield. And it's ultimately the younger generation that got its way. But we find this example where um, it is his trust in the sincerity and ability of the individual before him, uh, not any tropes related to age that determined how he interacted with people. So how do you, uh, uh, how do you project that from the legacy of the Prophet Sallallahu is that they have to know that you uh, that they there's an expectation that they are trusted as responsible human beings, and that that trust comes with um, accountability. That the fact that you are giving them responsibility, that means that at the same time, if there is a failure in discharging this responsibility, there will also be a treatment like adults, um, in the sense that there will be proportional accountability that comes with responsibility. I've always, I mean, my interaction with Muslim communities, I've, um, I mean, to be quite really honest with you, I've always feel that because the adults are often struggling with insecurities of their own, insecurities that come from lack of knowledge, ignorance, ignorance that they are rarely willing to confess or confront. Um, and insecurity that comes from the fact that so much of what they think they know is just based on imitation of what they think their parents or their, their grandparents did. Um, that there's when people are insecure, they act in cliques. They create little cliques that where they reaffirm one another, but they insulate themselves from the rest of the world. And part of what you insulate yourself against is the inquisitive minds of the youth, because the youth will often not have the same reverence for these cliques created by adults, and um, and the youth have inquisitive minds, and they have a lot of questions, and they will voice these questions. And when the adults, um, because they're acting out of these deep-seated insecurities, um, and because they've created these cliques where they reinforce one another but insulate themselves, they do not incorporate or welcome um, any of the real energy that the youth has, and that has a very devastating effect on the youth. You know, when the youth can complain that we don't feel like we are given weight, we don't feel that the adults treat us like they respect us, or that the adults think we are important, or you know, the constant that I've heard time and time and time again in Islamic communities in the United States. Um, there's a point that the youth feel that the adults become cliquish, and when you probe a little deeper, you find that the adults, you find that the youth sees through the pretenses of the adults. And the adults are actually not very learned, and they don't really know much. And the cliquishness is to protect their ignorance rather than anything else. Um, if you want, I mean, the rate of attrition among Muslims is uh, extremely high. I mean, I think Muslims just don't want to confront how high the rate of attrition among their children are. Um, more than in my view, more than Christians and more than Jews and more than Hindus and more than Sikhs. Yeah, and in part because of Islamophobia, you know, sort of the elephant in the room. Um, so many Muslim youths do not stick to Islam, um, and you know, and that is in large part because we do not take the youth seriously, and we do not create institutions that and qualified institutions, not just shooting from the hip institutions, but institutions that can uh, absorb that useful energy and direct it to useful causes. Institutions that get Muslim youth involved in sports projects, institutions that get them involved in scholarly projects, institutions that get them involved in political projects. Or in preservation projects where they not not go to Muslim camp and let's just sit together and listen to people who themselves don't know much about anything, but let's all pretend that uh, this camp actually is anything. It's really Muslim camps offer very little, if anything at all. Um, Useful projects are if you look at the example of what Hindus have created, or what Jews have created, or a lot of what the Christian projects for youth, projects that even at the very get those who are musically talented involved uh, in serious music, where they even end up performing, in the White House and in the United Nations, and that's part of giving your youth confidence and pride in their faith. Um, or that gives those who are talented in politics, or have a gift in politics, uh, you know, involvement in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, or those who are have the academic, those who are gifted in intellectual issues, uh, useful projects that uh, uh, create serious nexus with serious intellect, actual intellectuals in the world stage. Um, that's a matter of investment. That's a matter of, instead of buying an extra home in Egypt, or an extra home in Syria, and whatever Muslims spend their money on, uh, uh, coming to terms that your children have very little to do with Egypt or Syria or Pakistan, or and they to them these countries mean very little, if nothing, if not nothing. Um, and they need the investments here in the United States, in Europe, and that you don't these if you want to give them a sense of confidence and a sense of purpose, when you invest the money, you must get real professionals, because our world today is a world that is so complex that it is built upon technical specialization. Immigrants, the mind of immigrants is that they've learned from their parents, because we have all had wrong parenting, that the only technical fields are to be a doctor, a medical doctor, or some type of engineer. But that is so backwards. You have no idea. That is like 1,000 years behind at this stage. That's like being that's actually, among intelligent company, that's laughable. That's actually funny. Uh, our world, um, specialty and specializing, and even dealing with the youth and imbuing youth with confidence, it has become a specialized field. And you need to invest money to get that specialized knowledge. That specialized knowledge doesn't come cheap. We are all used to the model that, yeah, you pay money if you go to a doctor, you pay money if you go to an engineer. But if you want anything that has to do with the brain, you don't pay any money. That comes free, because every doctor declares himself a scholar at the same time. So, and we actually, we live with that, and that's why we've created ghettos, not communities. No, in our world today, if you want the best of the best, it's going to cost, and it's going to cost a lot. And even there are many people of law and social knowledge or psychological knowledge that cost as much of it as a doctor, if not more. And you know what? And it is entirely justified, because their technical knowledge is beyond anything that the average um, unqualified individual can even ever imagine. This is our world today. And if you want the youth to take us, I have to tell you that I've been doing a lot of reading about Hindu youth and the youth and the Sikh movement. Why? Because I am really impressed by how Hindu camps, the camps for Hindu youth, uh, are completely don't compare to the camps of Muslim youth. And Hindu children grow up with this sense of purpose and cause, and that I'm just and unfortunately large part of their program is hating on Muslims. I mean, a big part of their program, and a big part of the way they give their youth a sense of purpose, is to hate on Muslims. And I believe that they learned a lot of what they learned from Israeli camps, and the camps that create so many volunteers that go to Israel and then go to the occupied territories and steal Palestinian lands. That's all a product of giving their youth a sense of purpose, evil purpose, but purpose. Muslims are always very meek, and they still live in the dark ages, where they think that a medical doctor immediately becomes qualified to pontificate about everything in the universe, including education and law and politics uh, and they still talk to their children unaware that the 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 universes that their children are encountering are very layered and very sophisticated, and that the energy of these children needs to be channeled in ways that reaffirm the talents of these children and redirect these talents with a sense of purpose that I'll tell you a story. الله يرحمه ويحسن إليه ماهر حتحوت wanted to attract the youth and um, and give them a sense of he would always tell the youth, you are the leaders of tomorrow, you are the future of Islam, you are the leaders of tomorrow, you are the leaders of tomorrow. And that was fine, and it was necessary to communicate to these youth, this is serious. If tomorrow the fate of Islam depends on you. But what was lacking was exactly what I was just talking about: programs, professional programs in politics, in music, in academics, in even scientific invention that would connect these youth with things that are happening in the world, not things that are happening in Muslim communities, no, things that are happening in the world, so they feel important. So if they're talented in music, for instance, they get to perform with professional orchestra in many of the orchestras in Los Angeles and I'm blanking out, Irvine and so on. There are plenty of these, and all these orchestras have youth programs precisely for what I'm talking about. Or so what I noticed that the youth took this whole thing about, or you are the leaders of tomorrow. It became a sense of sickening entitlement and sense of sort of just arrogance of whatever we are Islam and we are the future of Islam, and without a program that vested this youth in learning, in experience, in directed their energy. So I was invited to a conference, and one of the youth, I was provoked by one of the youth making a comment on the stage about, are you guys worth my time? He was talking to the adult, and I had a very, what I had to say to the youth was sort of jarring, and they didn't like it, but a bit of dose of reality. But in all honesty, I don't blame them. I blame the adults who have not invested and who
Yeah.
still think that with that immigrant mentality that whatever you shoot from the hip and come up with is good enough. No, it's not. I'm
That
sorry,
also
but the whole
stems from Islamophobia. It's like there's like so many different layers, right? When you say insecurities, you have internalized Islamophobia, you have colonization, you have this concept like that. I feel like a lot of people in the community, this is why we're very blessed to have the school, right? Is that a lot of people do not feel the need to invest in these Islamic organizations. They do not feel the need to invest in it comes, I don't know what it is, but this idea, this concept of investing your money, right, is not, it's a battle sometimes, right, to get people to donate to certain Islamic organizations. And so you're just trying to keep your organization afloat. And then this is all beyond, it's a step beyond that. It's like, let's stabilize our Islamic organizations and then we can, go into all these fields. But the concept of even trying to stabilize, and access the funds sometimes is just very, very, very
The,
difficult.
the thing that aggravates me personally is that I have been hearing the same thing. I came to the United States in 1982,
Mhm.
and subhanAllah, the same thing about, oh, Muslims don't donate enough just to maintain what we have. So, and it's true, but it's true. And the only answer is that, I'm here to tell you something. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you know it, Sarah, but I'm talking about generally. Uh, if Muslims are among the stingiest um, uh, minorities around. I mean, you compare the amount of giving that Jewish communities. I
Mhm.
mean, I am shocked
Mhm.
at, how generous uh, wealthy Jewish families are for their causes. I mean, they give, and I'm serious with such generosity that truly it's like it, they have become like the Sahaba for their causes.
Yeah.
The type of Sahaba that, oh, here you can have half my wealth. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, and now I'm seeing it with Hindus and I don't know, Muslims are still, you know, maybe as you said, it's a product of colonialism, product of Islamophobia, uh, um, but that problem of oh, we hardly have enough just to sustain the institutions that we do
Mhm.
have right in the horizon. So, thinking about investing in, these other things that uh, is a dream that we're not even close to. And what I will tell you, if because I noticed also in one of the questions on the chat about, well, what do you do when you don't have these institutions? Um, if institutions are not there to help you, then
Mhm.
that just puts a greater amount of burden on you as a parent
Yes.
to constantly, uh, uh, well, one first to educate yourself
Mhm.
about um, uh, how beyond your world as whatever your existence of uh, uh, all this the ways that the cause can be served in our modern world,
Mhm.
and to become a friend to your child, especially in that age where they're to become truly a friend and to constantly talk to them about uh, their importance to Islam.
Mhm.
What I've noticed is that with Jewish families, they constantly drill into their
Mhm.
children that Judaism is in danger of disappearing. They don't tell their children this thing about, oh, we are the fastest growing religion, blah blah blah. All this false sense of pride and confidence. They actually tell them quite the opposite. Judaism is under assault. Jewish people are constantly under assault. Your Jewishness is the defense. You
Mhm.
being a Jew is the defense. I've noticed this also with Hindus now, is that, I mean, again, and whether you agree with it or not, their
Mhm.
narrative is always, but for you, my child, Hinduism is going to disappear.
Mhm.
And Hindu people are, going to be uh, 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 abused by the universe. Um, and your child needs this sense of importance. You know, uh, I have to take my Islam seriously because the fate of Islam depends on me. It's very dangerous to tell your child, "Oh, Islam will always be taken care of by God." This sort of there's a whole thing about it. I mean, it's completely that, oh, it's okay because God is always going to. We are a protected religion. It's type of language that starts sounding like the chosen people. Although Allah warned us against that and warned us against this attitude. Um, no, you can't just impart to your child that somehow miraculously Islam is fine, um, and Islam is not what comes from Saudi Arabia. Islam is not what comes from the Emirates. Islam is not what comes from Mauritania. Islam is not what you have to become a foreigner to your own culture to embody, because that's another thing is that often, especially among converts, you can't really become sort of the frontier soldier, a Jundullah, a soldier of Islam, unless first you go to Saudi or go to Mauritania and become foreign to your culture. No, Islam is you here and now, because it's very simple. If you, my child, don't grow up saying I'm a Muslim, then there is no Islam. And let's just can all be very honest and confronted. If you, my child, don't grow up realizing that if Allah blesses you with money, this money is not yours. This is money that Allah entrusted you with. So you, my child, you have to always think, yes, take care of your family, but beyond giving them what they need to be dignified human beings, then always think of how can I use this money to build up Islam, to strengthen Islam, because I can't. If the book, The History of Islam in America by Ghassan Busiri, when it's a very dense book, but I wish Muslims would read it, because what you discover when you read this book um, is that there have been so many generations of Muslims that had immigrated to the United States and to the Americas generally, but that have vanished. And that as long as Islam remained an immigrant phenomena rather than a native phenomena, Islam always within 2 or 3 generations vanishes. It's gone, khalas, completely. The only Islam that survived in America and in Canada and it is native Islam. Islam that nativized itself to the land. Islam that, to put it bluntly, became American or became Canadian or became Brazilian. Because I mean, there are numerous stories, or in Suriname and Chile and so on.
Mhm. So I will say, when I read your book, The Prophet's Pulpit, the khutbah about Islamophobia, I was just mind blown. And I remember, like, you read it. The thing is, you remember going through this phase, right? And I remember my parents going through this phase where you're so thankful that your kid calls themselves a Muslim. You are so happy that they want to be in Muslim spaces because you feel very insecure about it because you were made to feel that way. And I remember reading it and just everything made sense, right? And I do see that in immigrant experiences. They come to, like, my husband has a lot of friends from Egypt that just moved here at work, right? And so the difference between us and them is that they don't recognize the importance of Islamic schools. They're like, well, why do we need Islamic schools? There's public school. We want the kids to learn the language and integrate. And then we're the ones, like I was telling my husband, I was like, but we're the ones that went through that. We've been through the public school system. Alhamdulillah, we turned out fine, but we know what we were missing. We know that we were missing that sense of community, that sense of pride in our religion. We know that it was like you would hide when you were fasting. And it's the opposite for my kids. I feel like my kids, they love it. They have a sense of pride in it. When I ask them, are you proud to be Muslim? They think I'm weird for asking that question. They're like, what do you mean? Why wouldn't we be? And I think it's that. It's like sometimes you need to go through that. I feel like my parents recognize it. They encourage us to keep the kids at the school as long as we can. They love the school because they came to America and they established these institutions and they know what it's like not to have these institutions. And so I guess the conclusion is that maybe for us, where we know that the school is important, we've helped establish this institution, support this institution. Maybe the next step is to look beyond, is to start donating to push this cause even further and establish the next step.
And Zara, I want to just underscore this point because subhanAllah, I would hear back in 82, I would hear Maher Hathout Allah yarhamu wa ahsan ilayh, would make this point repeatedly. And having gone through all these years now, how true it is that he would always say, please understand, your children are not going to grow up Egyptian, they're not going to grow up Syrian, they're not going to grow up whatever, they're going to grow up first and foremost American, because this other, the citizenship, this Egypt that you have in your mind that is so important to you is really pretty much meaningless to them. But there's, I've, when we insist on Islam being largely a cultural phenomena, whether Pakistani, whether Arab, whether whatever, we exoticize Islam. And when Islam is instead of native to the culture, it is an exotic thing, it remains a foreign thing. And whatever is a foreign thing, you will find your children embarrassed by. If Islam, if they grow up seeing that their educational institutions, their teachers, their examples in life, their are not embracing the exotic and foreign, but rather focused on how Islam can be a part of the soil that they live in. And it's not white passing, or where you try to pretend to be white. That's not honorable, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Islam expressing what is native concerns, native issues, native problems, not problems that worried Egyptians in Egypt or Syrians in Syria or whatever. That Islam has a much better chance of surviving generation after generation. Not the Islam of, I've come to the United States, I expect to make money, I expect to raise my children, but in every regard, I remain Egyptian, and I pretend my children are Egyptian because, and that's an unexpressed sort of back thing, is that when all said and done, eventually I imagine myself going back to Egypt. Well, the news for you is, that might be fine for you, but for the children that they raised in the United States, they might have something very different to say about that. Just expecting them to visit Egypt, I don't know, once a year or whatever, doesn't make them miraculously Egyptian. And I want to underscore this thing about exoticizing Islam and making it part of a foreign phenomena. We Muslims must pay very special attention. Our teachers must pay very special attention to what exoticizes Islam in the society and seek to overcome it, because that is also what helps our enemies. That is also what helps Islamophobia, is that, whatever they point to Islam being part of an alien thing. Um, we're not aliens. We're just like all other Americans. Very much a part of the fabric, and it's just that we have to be better about communicating it, about yeah, relating it. Um, so we are not an exotic phenomena, and we're not something on the margin.
I think I remember being mind blown again, but it was I read the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, and he makes one statement. He says, "Assimilation is racism," and that was like again another like life-changing moment for me. And it's a fine line, right, between assimilating and whitewashing, but then also establishing like your sense of identity, your place in society. And I think it again, like I do feel like there is empathy offer like empathy owed, I think, to the immigrant population, just because of the idea of the internalized Islamophobia, that there is this like, underlying message. And I think colonialism also wasn't very helpful. So I do sympathize with that. I feel like,
But Sarah, like I've seen some examples of Muslim families that when they wanted to nativize, they've taught their children to relate and sympathize not with the narrative of uh, the uh, the dominant white man narrative, but actually with the narrative and predicament of the native to this land. So in other words, these Muslims grew up very in tune with uh, the story of Native Americans and African Americans,
Mhm.
and to them, Islam is a message of liberation and thoroughly a message of anti-colonialism and anti-subordination.
Mhm.
And as a result, the children, to them, Islam is clearly the cause of justice. And anyone that tries to make Islam, a part of what justifies subordination, it is just offensive to the core. And I actually find that very impressive. That okay, so in order to avoid white passing, in order to, I'm not going to focus. I'm going to focus on educating my children about the story from the perspective of those who were colonized, those who were eradicated, those who were erased. And it was very effective and very powerful. And I wish in our schools, I don't know I don't know anything about curriculum, but I just wish that there is so much that we can teach our children about the people who were oppressed in this land, who
Mhm.
suffered in this land, and and it what was the Prophet ﷺ about? What was the complaint of the Meccans? Is that all the subordinated and oppressed gravitated to him.
Mhm.
They ran to him like a magnet. In that is a sunnah for us. In that is an example.
Yeah. So a group of us have been listening to Dr. Hathout, Allah yarhamu, some of his tafsir this Ramadan. And there, he basically, I wanna bring up the point that I saw, just because it goes very well in line with your point. And it just, I think any call of liberation will attract the poor, the destitute, and the disadvantaged. Islam isn't an elitist faith. So I think it's understanding that point is it should be a religion of liberation. It should be a religion that's rooted in fighting injustices and in morality. And I think that also goes in line with your teachings.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to question number 4. We're in overtime now. Thank you so much for your time. The next question is, how does Islam handle toxic masculinity? And how can we raise our voice to feel confident in showing emotions and being good and fair partners?
Yeah, toxic masculinity has always been a huge problem. And again, uh, um, there is the famous dictionary of women scholars, whether these scholars were muhaddisat or jurists or whatnot by Nadawi. That's 35 volumes. But the reason that I mention it is that I was reading in these 35 volumes, and then you're struck by something as you get to you you get to volume. I don't remember what volume I was on, 6 or 8 or something. But anyway, you're really struck by something, is that in this dictionary of 35 volumes, that about 1/3 of that dictionary are women who either lived at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or women who lived in the generation after the Prophet ﷺ. And so disproportionately, women that encountered this man or were directly affected by the teachings of this man were inspired to become something worthy of preserving in history. Great scholars, great teachers, great poets, great whatnot. And when you study the Sirah, you really find that even the Quran, as we talked about in the tafsir, Surah Maryam, a lot of Muslims don't realize that Surah Maryam is about the empowerment of women, an empowered woman in the prototype, in the persona of Maryam. And that surah like al-Mujadala or in other uh, uh, reports, not al-Mujadala, but al-Mujadila, which then is the surah
That
be
was
named.
I'm interrupting you to let you know that was one of our favorites, Mujadala.
Yeah, it's Mujadila. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself responds to women creating their own narrative and imposing their own narrative. And the remarkable thing is that toxic masculinity was very much an issue in Medina. In other words, even with the Prophet ﷺ was alive, the voices of men that didn't like how empowered the Quran was making women, and how empowered the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ allowed women to be and encouraged women to be, they were scandalized. And the record is very clear by how scandalized they were, and how they've tried to invent all types of traditions later on after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, that they even tried to fabricate a hadith to try to put women back in their place. And uh, you know um, put it the best solution. I wish that you have time to go listen to the tafsir, because I go through in significant detail how the Quran empowered women repeatedly in several surah, and even in surah that uh, uh, toxic masculinity, to use that expression because I like it, surah that where toxic masculinity had tried to skew, to convey a narrative oppressing women. When you actually study the surah, you discover that it actually has a very different function and a very different purpose. So if you don't have time though to listen to the tafsir, or if if it's something that you're going to get to later on in life, um, but I have to underscore that the significance of the tafsir. Um, uh, know that there is Islam is a message of liberation against material oppression, against racial oppression, against all forms of oppression. And Islam did not create an exception for the oppression of male oppression. It didn't somehow say, all types of oppressions are wrong, but for the oppression of men against women. Uh, so intuitively, this has to be a part of your heart, knowing that Islam can never be or never justify an institution that lead to the consistent oppression of women. And knowing that when you are confronted by toxic masculinity, remember that Maryam alayhi salam defied the entire institution of male rabbis. The law of the temple is that women were not allowed to be rabbis, and women were not allowed to reside or to worship in the temple. And Maryam alayhi salam defied all of that and worshipped at the temple, resided in the temple, and was greatly praised by God and blessed by God for her parents wanted a boy so they can dedicate that boy to the temple. Allah gave them women. They said, well, we're not going to change our pledge that she's a woman. We are going to raise her to say no to the rabbinic class, and only if you wama adraka ma the rabbinic class was. And same thing, people don't realize that the reason all the friction arose between the whole the slandering of Aisha and all of that among the munafiqun is that the 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 Prophet ﷺ empowered his women, his wives, to the point that his wives became significant forces within society, and that the hypocrites, the munafiqun, were scandalized by this, by Salama being a major institution of charity, for instance, and her charity and her charitable endeavors embarrassing them because they didn't want to be this charitable. And when you remember examples like this, uh, then you might not know enough to respond to a male who is being toxic. But you can tell this male, listen, I know the purity and the morality of my religion in my heart. I might not know enough technicalities to respond to you right now, but I know that you're wrong. That I know because of the fundamental assumption that Allah has given me in my heart about how liberating and how fair my religion is. And someday I will know enough to rebut you. Maybe, after you've listened to the entire tafsir and studied the tafsir, you will know enough to rebut anything. But teach your children that. Teach your children. The other thing, but I really want to underscore this. The other thing is, your children, if they find, and I'm really sorry to say this, but I have to, and Allah will hold me accountable if I don't, that if your children hear about incidents of sexual abuse in the community by Imam such and such, or this imam accused of raping women, he leads prayer in Taraweeh, or this imam who is a friend of tyrants and dictators is invited to come lead Salat al-Eid. And your child is, remember, your child is always watching and observing, and they might not tell you everything, but their mind is always working. And when they see their parent, oh, you know, my parent, who was always telling me about how Islam liberated women, but when it came to an imam that exploited women, or abused them or whatever, my parent was political and saying, let's not talk about it. Yeah, okay, this is a scandal, let's just keep it quiet. Or my parent was not outraged by an imam leading Taraweeh prayer, or even agreed to pray behind such an imam. In my madhab, your prayer doesn't count if you pray behind such an imam in Taraweeh prayer or any prayer. It just doesn't count. The imam that leads has to be the most knowledgeable and the most moral, and and so on. Or that my parent is not offended by an imam that is serves tyrants, and is okay with scholars like Salman al-Oda rotting in prison, fakk Allah asro. Your child puts this in their memory bank, and then when it comes time, he might not rebel directly or that instant when they're 12 years old, but when they grow older and there's a temptation of a girlfriend, for instance, or his friends are saying, why are you taking this Islam stuff seriously? God, come on, it's not cool to be a Muslim, and then they think of the thing that sat uncomfortably with them, that they observed over the years, and they simmer, and then they become the reason that your child says, the heck with it, you know if the hypocrisies and lies. And so time and time again, I've known several Muslims who have gone to Harvard Law School or to Yale Law School, and I go out of my way to have conversations with Muslims like that, to find if they're still Muslim. And sadly, quite often I find that they're not anymore by the time they get to the third year. And uh, and then when I make it a point to engage them, also at UCLA Law where I teach, to engage them. Okay, why? And every single time, wallahi al-azim, every single time, it goes back to something that had to do with hypocrisy. Oh, my parent told me that Islam respects knowledge, ilm, and this and that. But I noticed that he just, halal and haram, he shoots from the hip. There's no ilm, there's no real respect. So it's all a lie. It's all just a bunch of principles that Muslims, throw around, but they don't believe in and they don't really practice. And uh, your child is always watching. Yani, your child is always watching. And if he catches or she catches hypocrisy, it is deadly, devastating.
So that even goes to, like, in my home, just modeling, right? Like, I have two girls. We don't have any boys in the family except my husband. And I always make it clear to him. I say, the way you treat me is how you're teaching them, what to expect from their husband in the future, how to be treated by men in the future. And so he feels that ever since I started the Tafsir project, he's doing a lot more dishes and helping a lot more. He's like, this is what I get from this. But yeah, so it starts, I think, in the home. I agree
Ilm
with
is
you.
dangerous, ilm.
It is.
Ilm
It's
is,
very
yeah,
empowering.
knowledge. Yeah, it's always been a danger.
No, but I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed, and I'm sure he feels blessed as well. But yeah, I agree with you. It starts within the home, and it also extends to how we stand for right and wrong, and how we're modeling our stances on these situations as well. Um, okay, so the next question. Okay, I'm trying to pick the best ones within the best ones. Okay, so I think this is a good one. How do we practice patience in times where our children challenge us intensely? And when we think of challenge, it could be a 5-year-old throwing a tantrum, but it could also be, I think, young adults engaging in things that are un-Islamic, kind of, that battle. I'm sure every parent has gone through that. And so how can we practice patience in those times and balance positive parenting, but also being firm?
Yeah, I mean, um, you know, if patience was easy, Allah would not have emphasized it so often in the Quran. I mean, the amount of emphasis in the Quran about وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرُونَ and similar expressions that, where Allah praises those who can be patient. And I really, one element that is really is that it especially when it comes to children, um, or sons and daughters generally, uh, do everything possible to develop a technique not to speak when excited. Um, that that if you find yourself, with that fire churning in your head or in your chest or wherever, where you are going to just, even if at the moment you really want to say it, even if at the moment it just makes perfect sense to you, it's the most sensible thing in the world. With children, always develop a technique where you can take time out and speak when calm, because this is not just something you encounter in psychology, but even in legal, in the legal field, you discover how 99% of the time when human beings create, the Islamic expression fitna, when they create some type of course of tribulation or instability or fitna, which could be shaitani, which could be demonic, um, any source of evil, it is quite often, I mean, 99% of the time, it's under the condition of excitement, and where at the moment, what in hindsight, you look back at and you think, this was an overstatement. I really, didn't mean this, or I didn't, I did what. When people commit physical violence, it's always under. I mean, so most of the time, it's under the sense of. So that to train yourself, that my what I learned from my grandparents down to my parents is that if you find ghadab, if if you start feeling that beset by ghadab, go pray. Don't speak. Go talk to Allah. And when you've calmed down, talk to human beings. You can Allah knows what is in your heart. So Allah is not affected by your anger. Uh, and go vent it out in your salah and your dua. Um, and remember that you are being rewarded for this. I mean, it is not just that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you get ill, you are rewarded by, if you're a believer and you rely on Allah, and every bit of suffering and pain you're rewarded for. But remember that your suffering with your children, you are rewarded for. There is, and the thing that really makes the tree of patience, of sabr, grow in your very being is that you are never patient alone. you are always patient with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Uh, it is like Yaqub alayhi salam, the father of Yusuf, tells his children, "Innama ashku hammi wa bathi ila Allah." I explain my sorrow and my pain. I release it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what I'm complaining to. And if you always get used to talking to Allah in the midst of your struggles with patience, Allah, you know what I'm going through. You know how much I've been patient. You know how much I- I've sacrificed. You know what I've done. Allah, give me the strength. Allah, اخلف علي بخير منها. Replace it with what is best. Allah, without you, I cannot stand, but with you, I'm strong. I rely on you. Allah, give me the strength. When Allah is your companion, patience becomes much easier and much more pure and beautiful.
I think
Yeah,
sometimes though it's very difficult for people that are going through like very
yeah.
heavy issues, yeah, with their children, like whether it be say atheism or addiction or there's so many other, and it just becomes very difficult for some
Very,
families.
very painful, very painful. I mean, I'm not minimizing any of that, but we are talking about coping mechanisms. I mean, in the case of addiction, well, Muslims are horrible. We treat addiction as if it's some type of, something that we ought to hide. And you know, addiction is an illness that strikes all types of people, and often, these kids that find themselves trapped in addiction, there was never a conscious moment where they decided to become an addict. And you have to, and I honestly, truly wish that in the same way that so many AA programs meet in churches, that they would be meeting in mosques, in Islamic centers, that Muslims would confront the reality that so many Muslim children fall, are trapped by addiction. And you can't just, our children are not dispensable. It's not just, oh, well, your child is an addict, let's just go on with life and ignore it. We have an obligation to create communities to support these families that are going through such, not just, I mean, I knew, unfortunately, more than one occasion where, a Muslim family, the child converted to Christianity, and the trauma that the family, and the shame and the embarrassment that the family is going through. And I kept thinking to myself, you know, if there were, if they felt less ashamed to uh, tell their community, to seek counsel with their community, if the community at large considered the conversion of someone to Christianity, or the atheism of someone, or the addiction of someone, our problem collectively, that the entire community, so that this family needs to be embraced and supported, not shunned and embarrassed. And part of them supporting, can you imagine if we were at the stage where we donated money, for instance, to bring in professional um, uh, um, counselors to talk to families of addicts, because families of addicts need a lot of counseling and need a lot of support, and or to the coping, to talk to families where someone converts, because a lot of times that child that converted, and I'll tell you, in every Muslim conversion story that I have been called in by the family to try to help, I find that the reason every single time that the reason that the child converted to Christianity has nothing to do with um, actual rational belief, but it has everything to do with the fact that they went to church and, to put it bluntly, they were love bombed. That the people in church just laid love on them, left and right. Made them feel so loved, so important. That they're coming to church is something that makes the entire congregation so happy. And that they contrasted this with the coldness of feeling that they got in whatever Islamic center they were involved in. And that, uh, and I'll put it quite simply, with the alienness and exoticism of Islam. Because this is like, the last one was an Egyptian girl from an Egyptian family. And, when you talk to this person, you realize that that the people at the church were very smart, because they validated the native emotions of this girl. They were not making demands on her to be a Masri, or to be uh, whatever Egyptianness in the mind of this family entailed, or to be exotic and foreign. In church, she didn't have to encounter any of the nonsense about the voice of women being aura, or the body of women being aura. She felt comfortable and celebrated. And of course, I know very well that this is all intentional on the church's part, because there's a book that I actually sent the parents, that was written about proselytizing to Muslims. And it lays out step by step, what do you do to convert a Muslim to Christianity? And the parent reading this book would go down and see the checklist of everything this community did to. But that's trauma, people. I mean, when I see what the family couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, the father and mother got to the point where they didn't care about work anymore. They didn't care about anything anymore. They often told me, we just wish we can die. Uh, it was, and you find this with addiction and so many issues. And the thing I am telling you is that, unlike our Jewish counterparts, or our Christian counterparts, or Hindu counterparts, we don't have mental health institutions to turn to. And that's because we didn't invest in it. We didn't tell enough of our children, Habibi, you want to serve the cause of Islam, specialize in mental health, because the mental health of our community is so important. And we need armies and armies of these people. And we need to invest money in this field. And we all have to work to raise the consciousness that feeling shame is not the answer. Shame is very destructive. Oh, my child is an addict, let me hide it. Nothing could be worse. But
Yeah.
we must
No, I
support
think,
each other.
yeah, I think there's examples in the Quran of that too. Like if you think of Prophet Noah, like sometimes I think as a community, we have to realize that you can do everything right. And at the end of the day, if
So,
the
yeah,
child is
absolutely.
an unbeliever. And there's also, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's also the phenomenon of churches sponsoring Palestinian youth for medical.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's
I
a
mean,
failing on our part, and it's also it's very strategic, I think, at the same
yeah,
time. If you're
I'll tell you, one of the fields that I teach is asylum law, refugee law. And one of the fields that I'm very involved in is refugee law. And can you believe, I mean, in order for this OPR program, the refugees from overseas, they come to the US as refugees and with refugee status. you need an NGO, non-governmental organization, to be a sponsor. So you need a church or a mosque or whatever. What you do as a sponsor is, you don't play a role in whether this person gets a visa or not. But what you do is that once this person comes to the U.S., you become their guide and their chaperone. You help them find a job. You help them get an education. You help them, go to the doctor. You become their help. And do you know that in my work in refugee law, I actually, all the sponsors for Muslims coming from Syria and from Yemen and Palestine and Afghanistan are Christian churches and no Muslims. And the purpose is blatant, because it's the idea of to show you the charity of Christ and the love of Christ, and the hope that what they're hoping for is that these refugees, a lot of them, by the way, are very young, are shockingly young. Like I had a refugee who's 14 years old, and he's a Muslim from Ethiopia. Yani, that's yeah, I can't tell you how many times I'm asked by people that I work with, why aren't there Muslim organizations sponsoring these people? And I give them the honest answer is that most Muslims don't even know about the sponsoring program, and most Muslims are still, after all these years, in survival mode. They just want to survive and just have the instant. But Yani, can you imagine our collective accountability for all the Muslims that are lost because they come to this land and they find the hand of charity extended by Christians, and the most Muslims do is they'll be told, "Oh, you're okay. Talk to the imam. Maybe the imam can, help you." And the mosque might have like, "Oh, give an AIDS program where you pay someone's rent for a month." That's not. Um, that's part of nativizing Islam, by the way. It is, if Muslim lawyers were taught that you are becoming a lawyer not to become rich and see your bank account grow. You're becoming a lawyer to help other Muslims. I am, as a parent, investing in you as a child so that you have a cause in life. Help other Muslims. You would have found a lot of these lawyers do what I see uh, lawyers from the Sikh community do, lawyers from the Hindu community do, lawyers from the Jewish community do, and that's they turn around and they help their community. I'll give you just one example, and then I'll let Sarah speak. I knew a lawyer who graduated from UCLA. He was from the Philippines, and once he was out of law school, he developed in his practice. It, it became well known that Filipinos from all over who have any work-related problems, work compensation, work discrimination, uh, they go to this lawyer who has made it a point that you don't mess with a Filipino. Uh, you know, I wish I had a Muslim example like that. This lawyer is not starving. Yeah, I'm sure he's not as rich as he could be, but we are the people who Allah have said, I've purchased from Muslims themselves and their monies. We are the people who are supposed to grow up looking at our money and saying it's not ours, it belongs to Allah. I don't know where that went. I really honestly, like, we need a lot of social psychologists to help us overcome the colonial legacy and the colonized mind, because Muslims were built a civilization where, when they were the most charitable people on the face of this earth, the Muslim awqaf are legendary. People have no idea how unbelievable the Muslim awqaf were, until they, of course, were destroyed by authoritarian governments and colonialism. But they were an earmark, an expression of Muslim charity. I have, in my study of the British records of colonizing India, there's a very fascinating letter that is sent by the first British governor of Muslim India back to the Foreign Office, saying the biggest obstacle to colonizing Muslims in India are their charitable institutions. Mind blowing. I mean, so I'm hoping to publish, if Allah wills, that I have my next study to publish this material, because the realization by the colonizer that as long as these people are giving their money, spending their money to serve their cause, and that is why, by the way, because I know, I've read everything by and about Islamophobes. A huge part of the Islamophobic industry was, let's teach Muslims to be scared of Islamic philanthropy, to make them feel that if they donate to Muslim causes, they might get accused of being terrorists. And sadly, these Islamophobes called upon some Muslim governments like Immigrant and Saudi and Egypt to help them in demonizing Islamic philanthropy. And but that tells you they understood very well. We want to defeat the Palestinians. We want to colonize what remains of Palestine. We want to take over in the same way that they took Masjid Ibrahim. They already stole it. They want to steal Masjid al-Aqsa. Let's strike at Muslim philanthropy. And if we strike at that, we will suffocate Muslim causes. And they were extremely successful.
I think most recently I had read, I was surprised. I had read Islamic Relief actually went through a situation where they were being accused of funding. It makes you worried. Like I know a lot of people who hesitate from donating to Islamic causes because they don't want to sully their name, or they don't want to be and it's very disappointing.
And Islamic Relief, they had to waste hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to vindicate themselves legally in country after country. Not one country have proved anything against Islamic Relief in terms of any relation to terrorism, but they had to waste hundreds of thousands of dollars defending themselves.
It's not only that. I think it was even the missed opportunities for the missed opportunities for help on the ground. Like it delayed their efforts as
Absolutely.
well. So we're nearing the 2-hour end mark. We can go on forever with you. I'll ask one last question. It's a bit heavy, but I do know that there's people in the community that have dealt with it in the past and dealt with it recently as well. How did the Prophet deal with the loss of his own children?
This is one of the most astounding and remarkable things about the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, is when you look at the sheer amount of tragedy in his life, which, subhanAllah, he understood that it is Allah is not punishing him for anything. But uh, so first say that because the heartbreak that the heartbreak is visceral when you read about the loss of his so many of his children, and often um, occasions right after there's a major victory for Islam and so on. But the when you look at how he reacted to this and what he told people about being uh, um, being separated from his children, there's several things. One is that he always repeated the theme and underscored the theme that every loved one in your life, that for Allah to give you an object of where your ghariza, your instinct, is full of love and attachment to such a person, that this is a gift and a trust from Allah. It's something that Allah gave you as a gift, as a trust, and you must deal with it as a gift and a trust, because any human being that is put in your path, um, whether a child or otherwise, that you relate to this human being through the emotion of love. Uh, Love is, as the hadith says, the hearts are in between the fingers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the hearts are, can be turned left and right, up and down, according to Allah's will. And when Allah puts in love in these hearts, it is a gift and blessing, and you must value it as a gift and blessing. But second, that then when Allah uh, uh, takes away this gift and blessing, you know, I know it's really hard. It's really hard, but we relate to things that are entrusted to us, especially um, uh, we start forgetting that they are entrusted to us. They don't belong to us. And that when Allah recalls them back, takes back their trust, they belong to Allah. And that our children never belong to us. They always belong to Allah. Yes, they were placed in our trust, but they never belong to us. And that Allah, if Allah takes away your child, especially a child, then it is far more likely than not that Allah did so for the benefit of the child, the benefit of the trust. That yes, it's very painful for you, but Allah knows something, that Allah knows that you don't know about the trajectory of life, and that Allah blessed that trust by uh, taking it back rather than leaving it, and that use the, an opportunity. I mean, when the trust is taken back, heal yourself with the awareness that and the belief that life on this earth is not the real life. That this is not it, and that's where a lot of pain comes from. Is that when we forget that no, you will be reunited with your children. Just make sure that what you use your time on this earth to reunite yourself with your children in the hereafter. I live every single day of my life, I do dua that Allah reunites me with my mother, because After she passed away, I felt that the world has ended. The, uh, she was such a majestic and beautiful human being that the world made sense in her existence, but the world stopped making sense when she left. And every single day, I pray to Allah that Allah reunite me with her when I leave this world, because that is the real joy and that is the real consolation. It is not a goodbye. It's really, in every sense, I'll see you later. And the more you can do things for your deceased child, if they were of adult age, to uh, things to plead for Allah's mercy. You know, I knew people, for instance, who had the family, the child committed suicide, and of course, you know, uh, you can't believe their trauma by the number of ignorant people that told them, "Oh, your child is in hell, khalas." What they dispense Allah's mercy? No, instead of sitting there in judgment, I expended my efforts trying to think of ways to increase the chances that Allah will forgive all and unite all in the hereafter. So I expended the time, instead of condemning and the blackness and the hate and the darkness, in researching all the things that they can do so that they can be reunited with their child, away from the pain and the agony and the ugliness and the illness that beset the family right before the child committed suicide. That is what you find this. You know, the prophet. Yes, the prophet was sad. Yes, cried. Yes, It- but what he would constantly emphasize is that Allah gave us a trust. Allah took the trust back, and you and I, this prayer he made with every one of his child. We will be reunited after this earth with Ibrahim, with Al Qasim, with Fatima. Uh, Learn that from the Prophet. It is, you know, as Allah says, this life, this life on earth is just uh, the field where you work for the life in the hereafter. And think of separation with your child from that perspective. Uh, okay, you know, for whatever reason, Allah knows best. Allah saved my child of the agony of having to confront tests, and you know, Allah Alam, which test you pass, which test you don't pass. Okay, but what I'm going to put all my effort in is to increase the chances that in the hereafter I am reunited with my child, and I know, because Allah told me that when I am reunited with my child, I'm not going to be reunited with my child ill and in pain. I'm going to be reunited with my child smiling and happy. And that is worth everything in existence.
Beautiful. I remember, just quickly before we end, I remember reading, I think it was a Humans of New York story, and it was about parents whose kid had a very rare cancer, and how they were raising funds knowing that that money would never go to their own children. It was for research for future trials, you know, for other people's children. I thought that was the epitome of somebody who loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Like, they knew that their kids wouldn't benefit from it, but they didn't want anyone else to have to go through that situation.
And dedicate the hasanat for to the deceased child. You know, if you do something like that, that's beautiful. When someone, you know, responds to the death of by donating, and then saying, Allah, the hasanat that comes from this donation, the sadaqah jariyah that comes from this, I dedicated to my child. Allah, please accept it, so that and please accept that me and my child be reunited in your Jannah, in your ultimate reality of beneficence and mercy and beauty.
Ameen ya Rab. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Khaled. I'm getting all these messages. I can't really open them, but I'm getting all these messages that how everyone loves you and they wish they could keep you forever. But you have more important things to get to.
Barakallah
Um,
feekum.
and I
May
personally
Allah
thank you. I
accept your
thank you
fasting.
for your efforts. I thank you for your teachings. You've had such a great influence on me and my life. I'm very thankful for that. And I hope that, inshallah, God gives you the strength to continue your amazing work and
Barakallah
hopefully
feekum.
inspire others to keep it going.
May Allah accept your fasting, and may Allah commemorate the occasion of the revelation of the Quran in the last 10 days of Ramadan. Renew your covenants with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and purge your demons, purge your shayateen. And may Allah accept from all of you, Ya Rabb, and bless your families and bless your children, so that your children will be a source of great happiness and pride in your life, Ya Allah, Ya Rabb. I truly pray that all of you will be blessed with that, inshallah, Ya Rabbal Alameen.
Ameen ya Rab. And for everybody who loved today, Usuli is currently fundraising for a future project on the Sira, given. So if anyone's interested in supporting, reach out to me, inshallah, and I can send you the information directly. Dr. Khaled, stay on. I want to catch up with you. Everybody else, feel free to leave. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. May Allah bless. Barakallah feekum. Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah.